This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, true seekers and true crime junkies. Welcome back to another episode of Hit the Road, Jack, Finding the Zodiac. Today we have Nolan Del Campo back with us. We're going to introduce him now. Are you there, Nolan?
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm great. It's been a long week.
Yes, it has. Just a little bit of laundry and research. I did have the numbers for last month on the episodes. We had 70 listenable episodes with 8,188 total downloads. I'm still trying to determine if that is just with Talk4TV or if that's the actual video itself, and that includes all the places that I have it up, including Facebook and Twitter and all of those other places. But the numbers are getting quite high. We did have a YouTube poster, JDM, brace yourself, said they were not smart enough to catch him. And that was in reference to the Dennis Kaufman video documentary on Jack Tarrance. And I did respond to that to some degree, I believe that PD was not properly prepared or trained for this type of crime at that time. And at the same time, they were likely never going to be able to solve it if the Zodiac had assistance, as we've been discussing. He then also said it's the real deal, which I appreciate it when people come on, take a look at that and see that there is well enough evidence there that law enforcement should be paying attention. I do believe that there's enough evidence there and that Jack does fit the basic premise of who the Zodiac murderer was. I know that you've heard a lot from me over the years, Nolan, in regards to the Zodiac. So what is your take on it? Do you think he's the best suspect?
Yes, I do. I mean, I've done a lot of reading on different crimes, mainly Zodiac, but tons of others, the Manson murders, satanic murders, Son of Sam. And to me, I think you're onto something with Jack here. Dennis was into it, and you're following in his footsteps.
Correct. I was going to say, I am not responsible for figuring this out by any means. I think that Tarrance Pascoe, who was the original examiner to look at Jack Tarrance's handwriting back in the early 2000s, they likely already knew. I did actually post somewhere here recently that it wasn't a coincidence that right after Jack Tarrance was turned over to law enforcement by Dennis Kaufman, that we started to see all the information and evidence in these cases disappear, such as the Zodiac letters that are no longer, the originals are purportedly no longer available. Though I know they are, they may just be saying that to us so that we all just, shut up and go away. But that's not what I'm here for today. I did this last Christmas. I'm going to show that up there. Ooh, let me get it out of the light. The Book of Useless Information, you guys. Now, of course, when it starts at the bottom with something like Earth is the only planet not named after a god, you might think that, yes, that might be some useless information. I do plan on going through this book because as I thumbed through it, and it only took me a couple thumbs, in which case I stumbled directly across JFK being shot, Martin Luther King being killed, people like Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe being, supposedly suiciding themselves. So I thought that was extremely interesting that anybody would actually even produce a book for America to see that says that this type of stuff is senseless or useless information. If it's useless, then that must mean that we shouldn't care about who runs our country and who's been responsible for us for all of these years and who they are willing to take out in life in order to facilitate whatever their agenda is. Either way, I digress. I am going to go through that and I will point some of those things out later. But right now, we're going to go ahead and hop into the PowerPoint presentation. Last week, we left off at the letter R's. And of course, I kind of hopped through that one really quickly. I'm going to try not doing that again so that we don't have to relive these slides again and again. We went through and we looked at some of the lowercase r's that we talked about with Jack, which was this heavy overhang with the stem that protrudes way up into the air above that overhang, to this rightward slant that occurs in his r's. And some of his r's are almost completely straight, and there's just a little tiny hook there on it, and you could see that coming down off the top of the one right next to it. We talked about the checkmark r's, which is exactly what they were looking for in somebody's handwriting back in the early 70s in regards to these cases. And we can see the different variances of that check mark that Jack executes. We also had that flat-lined, elongated overhang that occurred. These others that reached far up into the sky. Here's another one that's nice and straight. And then the looped R. So as we start with this and we hop over into the killing case, we can see some of these tall R's with the overhang that shoots straight up in the air, which is something we're going to see throughout this presentation. We also see the looped R's, the looped stem R's with that high reaching overhang again. As we went through the presentation, I believe I found them in the Dear Draft Board letter. We have a looped R here. We have one in the D.B. Cooper case. Oh, speaking of which, I did handle a case this last week in regards to a bank robbery, and I did kind of find it a little bit comical that there was a note written, so I had to analyze this note to determine if the suspect's handwriting was consistent with that note. And it made me kind of giggle and think of D.B. Cooper because he asked for his notes back. So if people are still out there trying to rob banks and you're using notes to do so, please at least be smart enough to take it back. Not that that's going to save you by any means, because we have far too many cameras, cell phones, and other things out there that are going to catch you anyways. But I just thought that was kind of comical because I just didn't know people were still out there robbing banks using notes. Anyways.
Woody Allen, take the money and run.
Yeah. I also found a loop R in the OCCK case, and let's see if we had any other looped R's in there. No. All right. So moving on. When we got into Elizabeth Short, we started to see these awkward overhangs that we talked about in Jack's writing. We saw the stem that is protruding high up into the air. That seems to be a ruse, but it is definitely something that Jack does. And we found that the Elizabeth Short R's were very consistent with the Kern letter, which, of course, this is the same era, 47, 48 in Southern California, all the way over to what I referred to as kind of these hatchet R's, where we don't see the stem at all, and we just see the overhang that comes directly off the top. I started to see these actually in many of the communications. We'll talk about those as we hit them and go through. Oswald also had that checkmark R, just like we were looking at up there in Jack's writing. We can see that those are very consistent. And then, of course, here again is that high raised overhang, and then the almost straight overhang or straight R that we were seeing up here in Jack's handwriting with no overhang at all. And then what I refer to is the angular R that is found in Jack's handwriting. And we started to see these over here in this part. We can see that angular part up there. So we had consistencies between Sherry Jo Bates writing with Jack's actual R's. Here again is that R with no stem and the overhang, which I said was consistent with what we saw in the Kern werewolf killer. And we also saw the checkmark R in Sherry Jo Bates. Carrying on into the Dear Draft Board letter, aside from that looped R, we did have some very close to that check mark R, where it doesn't appear to be a stem. It looks like an actual check mark. The overhang is actually the exit stroke extending off to the right. And then we had, again, these no stem R's that look like they are formed in a single stroke. This is what I was referencing when we were talking about it back up here in the Sherry Jo Bates and in the werewolf killer. And these particular R's were found in, let's see, we found them in the John Benet Ramsey note. They were fairly heavy there, aside from The scorpion letters also bared similar, if not identical, type R's to the John Benet Ramsey, and those match the Christmas card R's. So as we go through, we'll see more of those. Let's see. I found one in the Atlanta, Georgia Killer. I found them in, let's see, in the SLA letter by the Zodiac. So we can see how these letters, like the Christmas card and the SLA, and let's see if we had any of those directly in Zodiac. We did not, but okay, we'll keep on. I do have what I refer to as the perfect copybook R, and I've notated those as we go through. You can find them in places like the Oakland County Child Murders. You can find them in the Red Phantom letter. Let's see here. I found it in the Tim Miller letter. So these perfect constructed R's are absolutely an identical match to the Zodiac writings. We also had the checkmark R's that are consistent, if not identical to what we're looking at. These ones here in particular with the curvature are consistent with what we see up here in Jack's handwriting. So as you go across and we see a checkmark like this, we see it down here in the Zodiac. We see that flat lined overhang on the R that is consistent with what we saw up here in Jack's writing. So the Zodiac actually shared several. Here's that angular overhang that we found inside of Sherry Jo Bates that is consistent with the Zodiac Killer. And so this, if we are still catching up with everybody, so you understand and you're just chiming in today for the first time, a blue circle around Jack's handwriting means that that particular style R is found in the crime scene notes, and we can look down and find those circled in blue as well. If they are circled in red, that means that there is a consistency with a between crime scene notes, the letter R. And then if it's circled in red and blue, it means that it is consistent both with Jack's handwriting and another crime scene note. The stars indicate that the Zodiac Killer has been identified in these particular communications. So as we go through, we see the Zodiac Killer, we see the Fairfield letters, the SLA letter, the Citizen letter, the Channel 9 News letter, the Red Phantom letter, the Sacramento letter from 1986, and the Christmas card. So if we take and combine all these letters that have already been, or all these communications that have been identified as the Zodiac already, and then we turn around and apply those particular disguises and look for those disguises in other communications, that's how you're seeing all of these markings on this page. Typically speaking, I tell people when you see this many markings in any type of a handwriting, you're looking at an identification, unless I'm pointing out differences, which indicates it's an exclusion. So we also have slants that we're paying attention to. So I have a slant bar up here on this particular R showing that it actually leans very heavily to the right. And I copied and pasted, so it's identical. It's not manipulated or moved. And we can see that that slant is consistent through many of the R's. Going through the Fairfield letter, again, we found this high stem with the heavy overhang. We found the R's again without the stem, and it's just basically a single stroke that is consistent with what we just talked about. Onward and down to even more checkmark R's and flattened overhangs that we saw in Jack's handwriting that are consistent with the Fairfield letters. D.B. Cooper also used the high stem R, as we see here. We see that stem protruding to the left, and we start to get into what I refer to more of these flattened or straight line R's that we are seeing out of Jack's handwriting. The Albany letter has this very almost umbrella-like or heavy overhang on the R, which was consistent with other R's found throughout this series. Here again, we have another one that matches Jack. It's that small overhang that kind of leans to the right. That's up here in this top portion. And then again, I want to say that Terry B refers to these particular R's as pistol R's. He looks at these almost as if they're kind of animated versus being not animated, I'm sorry, as pictures versus being letters. And he refers to, in a lot of cases, this pistol-shaped R. And so I've kind of nicknamed these in the SLA and on forward the pistol-shaped Rs. SLA also had this very straight stem with almost no overhang, which is consistent with what we've seen in Jack's handwriting as well. And then when we looked at the citizen letter, I started to see this particular, it's almost a V shape with a little hook of an overhang that's occurring, but the citizens R's are very consistent with the Oakland County child murder R's. Let's see, consistent with the Red Phantom R's, consistent with, let's see. I did start to find some of that particular style also in the John Benet Ramsey R's. So moving into Herb Cain, these ones are very hard to see, but they almost look again like that pistol-shaped R. In the guest letter, we actually had that perfectly printed R that we saw in the Zodiac Killer when he was attempting to disguise that as copybook writing. But we certainly started to carry right on into those checkmark R's that the Zodiac is well known for. The Atlanta, Georgia child killer also used the similar style R's as the Herb Cain and as, let's see, this is the one with no stem that we kept talking about. So SLA R's are consistent with the Atlanta, Georgia child killer. We did again also see what appeared to be a very close resemblance to the elongated overhang that we saw in Jack's and that checkmark version, along with those pistol-shaped R's that we talked about that were occurring down there in John Benet Ramsey and Scorpion and in the Christmas card. The Sacramento letter, again, we found one that was matching with Jack and matching with other crime scene notes. And in Vowinovich, I thought these were very interesting R's that occurred. They had definitely this high stem, which is consistent as we go back and look at things like Elizabeth Short and other places. This is just one of the disguises or ruses that he used. When I climb down into the Tom Voigt, it is not a surprise to me that many of these R's, as we can see again, here's that particular R. I probably should have marked this one here. That's the one with no stem. Very consistent with the Albany, New York message, very consistent with the Christmas card, the Scorpion, and the John Benet Ramsey. But we also had some with angular tops that were consistent with Jack's. And then, of course, a couple others that were consistent yet again, almost as if this is that similar style of that checkmark R that we were looking at with the curvature in it, very similar to those. In the Tim Miller letter, I found various R's that not only matched the Zodiac, also matched Jack. Again, here we have those angular top R's that we were talking about that were consistent in Sherry Jo Bates and in Jack's. On the Bruce Ivans, I found these straight R's. And at first, I wasn't sure that we had anything that was really a match. I mean, some of these were consistent with R's that were found in the crime scene notes, but these straight ones, I thought, did we have any of those? And sure enough, when I went back and looked in Jack's handwriting, I started to see and find these straight lined R's with this heavy rightward slant. So that again puts the Bruce Ivans greeting card right in the middle of the mix and consistent with everything else we've seen. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Nolan?
Just that Jack's original writings on top, there's so much variation in his R's. He had several different styles. And It's hard to tell when he's being natural or when he's trying to disguise.
Well, and I laugh about that because I naturally think that if you're attempting disguise, your brain is reaching in for an image it already knows. It just believes that in that particular moment, that is not a version that you use. And they may recollect or see themselves or idealize a particular version. When we, in reality, have 2 to 8 ways we can write any letter and number of the alphabet and the number system. So it doesn't shock me that we see at least, I want to say, about 6 or 7 different variations of the R's up here, but there are many variations inside of Jack's R's that I don't do at all. You know, I
Right.
don't do any of these check marks. I don't do any of these flat line straight ones. I don't do anything with a curvature in the stem like this. So I have to then I idealize the deviation from the learned lesson, which is the alphabet up on the board at school. You idealize that perfect copybook print. How does
Right.
this individual deviate from that? And then I also compare that to my own handwriting. I don't know if I'm being a little self-interested at that point, but if it's different from mine, then it's worthy of noting, is how I feel.
Right. And people's writing can change over time in different parts of their life. And a lot of it can have to do with how much in a hurry they're writing as well.
Or drugs that they might be on, outside
Yeah.
influences, like
Alcohol.
you yep, emotions. In graphology, they discuss that handwriting is just a snapshot in time based on the emotions and feelings of the author and how they're portraying written communication at that point in time. So while we perceive it as a change and that we all have different ways we can write, it's really just an arsenal that we have. Like I said, you can write any letter of the alphabet 2 to 8 different ways, and we carry those capabilities. So the chances that he is pulling out something he believed to be disguised is probably one of the versions he least recognizes that he uses. I still find that even when people think they're disguising their handwriting, just as this banknote writer was, there were so many small, fine, subtle characteristics and identifying factors that he couldn't stop doing or get rid of. And that's what makes an identification in handwriting. So moving on to the letter S's, I have combined both the capital letter S's and the lowercase s's in this particular, I believe. Yeah. Yep. So let's just talk a little bit about some of Jack's. The capital S's in Jack's writing, obviously, we are going to pay attention to the overhang on the top, how the midsection is formed, how the bottom actually exits out. And we can see there are variations in Jack's capital S's. He tends to have this, again, reaching forward look, and some of his actually look like backwards Z's, backwards twos. And so those are kind of some of the idealizations that I've made as far as the perception of the appearance of the letter. We
Some
did
look
have.
Some look like the number 5 too. Several look like the number 5.
Exactly. So I have pointed those out, and I will reference those as number 5s because we will see those throughout the communications as well. I did circle up here the S that was done in block form, and that was obviously because Jack liked block form. We saw block form used in several of the communications. I want to say that the block form in this one was probably found in D.B. Cooper. Yes. But then there's that number 5, Nolan.
Yes.
Yeah. So speaking of which, yes. So as we go down the line, we have what I refer to as the lightning bolt S. This lightning bolt S obviously is missing most of the top portion of its actual curvature at the top. We have the number 5 S. We have what I refer to as the backwards 2S. Again, these kind of reminded me, was that the ZZ Top? Who had the double Z's? You know who I'm talking about?
Top. Yeah.
ZZ Top. Okay.
Yeah.
Because we see a lot of these. Look at Elizabeth Short. I mean, right away, just tag, boom. We've got these.
That reminds me of the Nazi symbol too, SS.
That's kind of where I my head kind of went there, but I wasn't familiar enough with that to be able to state it.
Yeah. Reminds me.
Yeah. And again, here is that Z-shaped or the backwards Z, should I say, the lightning bolt S. So carrying on, Lipstick Killer, obviously his ruse or disguise was to attempt to elongate that S and straighten it out as much as possible with very little curvature in it. But one of the final S's that I found was that lightning bolt S. And that was consistent, obviously, with Elizabeth Short. So here he is thinking he's doing something out of disguise when in reality, it's something very much existent in his own writing. When I looked at this particular S here with Elizabeth Short, we can see again how that is running in rhythm with these over here from the Lipstick Killer, right? This one may not be as angular, but you can see how spread the top bowl from the exit stroke of the S is and how consistent that is with Elizabeth Short. Moving right on into, now I found these little guys here. They're almost like squigglies, and one S sits on top of the another S. And I found that whenever I found the double S's in these crime scene notes, that they were truncated, I guess, if you will. They were very small in comparison to the rest of the writing around them. And we notice right over here in the Kern letter, here's another double S, very tiny little S's, like we're seeing. When I climbed in this Sorry Mary letter, these S's with this rightward slant were very consistent with other crime scene notes. Let's see if we can figure out where I had those. So with the Oswald, the rightward leaning S, where do we have these guys? Down here in Atlanta, Georgia, we see similar style S's. Moving on through, I also found this kind of square shaped, and that's what really kind of brought me back to that number 5, is having that square shape on top. Very consistent as we go through. I'll point those out. We see that, again, the S's that are in Sherry Jo Bates are consistent with S's that are found inside of the Dear Draft Board letter. I've found many consistencies between Sherry Jo Bates and the Dear Draft Board, and likely, like you said, Nolan, because it's close in time frame, this was the style, or this was what he was using at that particular point in time. But I did note that this angular portion that's happening on these S's that look like number 5s were also found in the Dear Draft Board letters. So we can see those again here. And in fact, this particular number 5, or, combinations of both this one and this one together, are consistent with Jack's number 5 S's as well. And also in the Kern Werewolf Killer, we found the backwards 2S that I was discussing up here in Jack's handwriting. There we see it again. So it basically looks like a backwards number 2 with a very elongated exit stroke. Oswald, again, we found similar markings. There's that backwards 2S again. That just keeps popping up in these communications. Let's see. Zodiac, we had several. We had the Z shape. We had the backwards number 2 shape. We had the perfect S copybook shape. Obviously, this one was directly cross comparable with the Scorpion letters. We can see them down here, absolutely identical. We could see even in the Scorpion letters, the little tiny S's that are used that are very consistent with the Kern, very consistent with let's see here. Even the Zodiac's little S's are consistent with those. So, okay, so here is another version in the Zodiac that is very consistent with the Oswald number 2s. So as we go back and forth, again, here is another S that is a little more straight line, a little more elongated. We have that high reaching instead of curved top portion, which is consistent with more crime scene notes like these ones down here with the Atlanta Child Georgia Killer. The Fairfield letter had consistencies with that, very, very similar in shape and size. We just got done looking at these S's here. I want to say the Atlanta Child Georgia Killer also matched S's found in the Oswald letter. And of course, we did start to see that lightning bolt shape S again in the Fairfield letters that is consistent with Jack's. The DC Freeway Phantom S's, again, very consistent with that high reaching top arch of the S, very consistent with the Atlanta Child Georgia Killer. So DC Freeway Phantom was very consistent in that sense. DB Cooper, the number 5 S's that we discussed, there were several of them found in there, but I also found other versions of these S's that were consistent. I was looking for this one last night. Where did I find this one? Okay. So the Fairfield letter is consistent, obviously, in the bottom shape of that particular letter S, and even the top portion being flattened out with an angular backside was consistent. The Albany, New York letter had the number 5S again. It had the backward 2S. And then, of course, it just has some other wonky S's. The bottom line is when you look at some of these, I probably should have marked this one. This one is very similar to Jack's right here as it pertains to these S's up here at the top. SLA also attempted to use that strung out looking S where the bottom portion of the bowl is extended so far out it doesn't really necessarily have a curvature and it is leaning far to the right. Getting over into the citizen letter, we found again that backwards 2 formation, and I'm not sure why I marked this one, but I know that there'll be a version of it inside of here. The citizen letter being very consistent. Oh, okay. That's where it is right there. The citizen letter is, nope, I wouldn't be comparing that one to the same. We'll come across it. Channel 9 newsletter had the lightning bolt or backwards Z shape, the number 2 shape. And again, we see that lightning bolt shape as well. The Red Phantom also had consistencies with the citizen letter because, of course, we know that was written by the same hand. The Oakland County child murder S's we did find were consistent with, I want to say this one was consistent with the Dear Draft Board letters. And this one here with the curvature was very consistent with the Atlanta, Georgia child murder S's. So climbing down into the Herb Cane, we did have a set of double S's that I found to be consistent, along with that more copybook or attempt at making a more perfect letter S. Let's see, we had this one matching Jack's. Yeah.
The Atlanta murders you're referring to, the child murders, are those the ones that I think a guy named Wayne Williams was accused of and convicted of? But there's a lot of theories there were a lot more people involved or different people involved.
Wayne Williams, I believe, was actually convicted of killing a woman. So he did actually kill one person, but that wasn't the victimology of the Atlanta, Georgia killings. I think they were males and they were children. So we had boys
and some teens, but mainly younger children.
Correct. Yes. Correct. And one of the phone calls from the victim home to her mother had indicated a nice white man had picked her up and given her a ride to his house where she was calling from. The police surmised that the suspect had told her to say it was a white man when it was actually a black man. That's their premise. But I'm going to show you when I get to that phase how none of the evidence fits a black man committing these murders. And on top of that, she had no duress. She wasn't scared. There was nothing inside of this little girl that led her mother to believe that she was in an unsafe position. So I think if a child was being told or forcefully told to lie strictly to their parents, there would have been some type of indication or some sense, because I want to say she was young. She was between like 8 and 12 years old. I think that if she felt she was in a dangerous place or she was being told to lie to her mom, there would have been some indication in her voice.
Correct.
All right. So the S's, obviously the number 5 S's continued on. And of course that wonky little shape that we see down here is definitely what I was looking at back up there in the Elizabeth Shorts. The way those S's are formed are just very consistent with the way the S's are formed in the Herb Cane letters. The Atlanta, Georgia murders, of course, we had some of these S's here are just more copybook. Like this one here in particular is more consistent with what we see in that copybook impression from Zodiac, from Oswald. We also saw that, again, lightning bolt style S. We saw the S that had that straight up overhang and that is straight that we are seeing in DC Freeway Phantom and many of the others. These I found directly relatable to Jack's handwriting. I want to say it's cut off a little bit. These are the S's over here that we're looking at down here that are consistent, and it's cut. The screen has kind of cut my exit stroke off there, but you would find that it is elongated just like this. Again, we found that lightning bolt, and that carried on through the Sacramento letter into the Christmas card letter. Actually, again, was more of these upright, very attempt at making them very perfect until we got into the lowercase S's. Scorpion, we already discussed that. We can also see these small S's are very, very consistent with things like the Kern letter and with Sherry Jo Bates. I'm sorry, with Elizabeth Short. John Benet Ramsey also had I mean, I just don't find these to be coincidences, these Z-shaped S's that we keep finding anywhere. And this one might be turned up just a little, but if we looked at that in comparison to Jack's, very, very similar once again.
Again, it's the Nazi SS. Now, on the Joan Benet ones, I think just the single S's, they look like they're trying to disguise, but the SS looks more natural and looks a lot more like the SS's that we find in Jack's writing and lots of the other writing as well.
Correct. And the relation, how they sit next to each other, very close in relation to each other, very consistent. I probably should have marked some of these up here with the Zodiac as well, but there are definite consistencies that I'm finding in the John Benet Ramsey. Voinovich, we had that backwards number 2 S that we saw in Jack's handwriting. And then, of course, we had that flat topped S again that we were seeing. So basically, the Voinovich S here is very consistent with the Zodiac Killer S up there. The Tom Voigt, is not strange to me that we are looking at, again, extreme similarities in both the bottom and the top portion of these S's, both with Jack. So here's that one with that little tiny overhang with the tick mark. We talked about that early on. It was one of the first S's that we looked at up here in Jack's writing. Again, it does not shock me that many of the S's that we see in the Tom Voigt's letters are very consistent with Jack's writing, since that had been identified by Jack's stepson or a biological son. And again, of course, we have that flat top S that we had marked out over. See if I can find where I had that. It's in here as you go. Oh, I think that was actually right up in here. So that's that style in the Oakland County child murder. And there's more. I mean, as you go through, you're going to find them as you look for it. Tim Miller letter, again, these ones had that impression of that backwards number 2. We see it. He's, of course, trying to stay more upright about it. And the exit stroke is not as long. But again, as I look at them, they just appear to be just like number 2s that are backwards. We also see those perfect copybook written S's that are consistent as well with things like Scorpion and the Zodiac. Bruce Ivans, these ones were a little bit more hard to determine, but they have that elongated look that we talked about early on, such as those up inside of the Oswald, the lipstick killer case. That's probably where I should have marked these guys to be consistent with things like these elongated S's. They almost look like they took the S and pulled on both ends and straightened it out. And that brings us to the letter T, the capital letter T. Where are we at? 7:36. We're doing good, Nolan.
I've only got about 5 minutes left, though. But
okay. Well, thank you.
You'll be fine without me.
The capital letter T, I did 2 things with this. One, I posed it next to the letter H because I wanted to talk about the way Jack worked his capital letter T into the letter H when he wrote these words. In his T's, I find that Jack has a very heavy overhang, which is nearly the size, if not longer, than the actual stem of the T. And we'll see this as we go through. We also have the T that is crossed more to the right-hand side than it is to the left. That is consistent in many of his T's. We've marked and notated the slant of the stem of the T as well as the slant. And I went with the obvious, the furthest degree that we found in Jack's handwriting for that slant. So we do have one that is a less of a slant to the right, but I marked both of those, one that was probably more normal and then one that was ranging on that hard right slant. Also, I have notated or put out a bar for the slant of the crossbar on the top of the T. And we can see that in many of these cases, like these up here are actually D.B. Cooper, but I brought those in because of this left hand crossing. So, of course, he attempted to make it look like he only crossed on the left-hand side of these particular T's, but we do see one that actually crosses through. And I found some lowercase T's that he actually didn't attempt to make that disguise, and he crossed all the way through just like a normal T. So now we can go back and look at the way Jack poses that crossbar and how it meets up with the letter H. It actually meets up below the top of the H. So your H should be technically underneath that crossbar, just like we see right here. But in many cases, we see where that crossbar touches right into the the stem portions of the H, which makes the H look like it's kind of hopped up off of the baseline. And so another one that I notated was this fanciful T that looks like the stem was drawn down to the baseline and then he wrapped back up in one full stroke. Oh, darn it. And cross that T at the top. And I brought that one up because we're going to look at least one version of this. It's more like creating a star, if you will, in my mind, where you don't pick the pen up and you just continue moving until the letter is completed. So as we go in and we start to look at the letter T's in the Lipstick Killer, one of the things I noticed first was that we had very long stems. That's contradictory to what we're looking at in Jack's handwriting. And we have these very short crossbars. And of course, this one is only crossed on the left-hand side here and then brought down in a single stroke. And that is consistent with the D.B. Cooper letter T's. The T that actually runs into the H right here in Lipstick was very consistent. Obviously, if we take that particular TH and we cross compare that to Jack's TH over here to the right, you see that we are extremely consistent, not only in the way the T connects to the top of the stem of the H, but how that H plays out with the left hand leg that is shorter than the right hand that comes down a little bit further. Again, very consistent with Jack. And then back into, of course, these very tall stem T's with very short crossbars. So obviously this is what Jack believed to be a disguise because he didn't want it to look like his short, fat, wide T's. So we've got straight, and we're going to see a lot of these in the communications, which tells me that's truly the disguise that he went with. When we climbed over into the Elizabeth Short, we started to see more of the heavy weighted crossbar on the top that was more even, or if not longer than the stem. That is very consistent with Jack's T's. All the way down to, again, longer stem T's with very short crossbars, which is consistent with the Lipstick Killing case. The slant of the T's were consistent, and we had T's that were identical in shape. So we have this T up here by Jack, and we can see how the stem actually has a slight curvature to it and leans hard right. That's what we've got going on over here in the Elizabeth Short. When we got into the Sorry Mary, again, we started to see these long stem T's with short crossbars. So these are extremely consistent, you guys, with what was going on in the Lipstick Killer case and very close in time frame. The Kern letter had the backwards JT. I call it the backwards JT. Well, it's the backwards. It's a J, but the T at the stem actually curves backwards to the left and has a slight hook on it. And this is what Terry B refers to as the JT inclusion, because it not only makes the T, but it also makes the J. And if you paid attention, well, we haven't gotten there yet. Sorry. When we get to the lowercase T's, we're going to find these type of T's were actually used in the Lipstick Killer's communication, which is that JT mix. The Oswald letter T was just spot on with what we were looking at with Jack. The slant of the bar is slightly lower than the slant that I pulled out up here. But like I said, this was the extreme version. Jack also can do, obviously, a straight crossbar. So this fit within the realm, and of course the slant of the stem as well. The weight of the crossbar over the top of the stem is very consistent with Jack's writing. In the Sherry Joe Bates, we had kind of a mix. We had both these heavy weighted crossbars with the stems all the way to the very long stem with the very short crossbar, which again is consistent with Lipstick Killer, Elizabeth Short, Sorry Mary. I could just go on. Like I said, we're going to keep seeing those. The slants of the crossbar and the slant of the stem are consistent both with Jack's. Dear Draft Board, we almost seen again this backwards JT formation with that curvature that happens in the stem of the T, but we do see these heavily weighted or heavy crossbars again with the shorter stems that are very consistent with Jack. In fact, I found again that this one was extremely consistent with Jack's particular handwriting with that angular portion that happens at the top of the hump. Zodiac Killer tend to attempt to cross his T and touch the top of the stem, which we did show that Jack does do in his writing, but we can see that he, more often than not, that crossbar hits right into the backside of that H stem. Well, that's what started to happen. Once the Zodiac began to write a little more freely, not only do we see that curvature in the T that curves back towards the left that is consistent with Jack's T, we also see H's that are very consistent with Jack's H's as well.
Jeanette, I'm going to have to split now.
All right.
You're doing great.
You have a good day in court, and I wish you luck.
I'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Continuing on, again, the crossbar in this particular T, not only is this T a dead-on match to what we were looking at up here in Jack's writing and Elizabeth Short, we see that the crossbar of that T heads right into the backside of that stem of that H once again, and that shape of the H we've already discussed is a shape that was used by Jack when we talked about the H's in the past. The curvature that occurs on this particular letter H is definitely something we see in Jack's, where the actual feet of the H are closer in relation to each other than the actual hump itself. Nope, let me get that timer. Okay. Continuing on, in the Zodiac Killer, we found there was consistency with this particular formation of the TH. Let's see if we can figure out where that one is. Yeah, we'll come to it. I'll point it out. The slant actually in the Zodiac Killer stems are consistent. The weight of some of the T's, obviously, with the heavy crossbar over the top of the stem that is slanted to the right, is consistent with Jack's handwriting. The Fairfield letters, the crossbars, again, consistent with the slant of Jack and the stem. The DC Freeway Phantom actually chose to use that long, skinny stem with the tiny little crossbar like we saw in Lipstick, in Elizabeth Short, the Sorry Mary. I mean, we could just keep going on. We're going to keep seeing that. Also using, again, these particular TH references, and we know that the H's are very consistent with Jack's once again. Into what I would refer to as probably more of a, these are DB Cooper. So what is he doing? Oh, I'm sorry. So all of these T's right here are DB Coopers. I thought that was DC Freeway Phantom. It's not, but we do see the relation. We also see the attempt at disguise to kind of sway that stem to the left, but we do see that there are plenty of T's that move in the correct direction, including the weight of the crossbar over the stem. The Albany, again, these T's were very consistent with this curvature in the small crossbar. So we had long stems, small crossbars in the Albany letter, and we see that curvature in some of these stems that were happening up here in Lipstick Killer as well. All the way to the more square version of the T that I like to refer to, which is that heavy crossbar and the shorter stem. I also notated the not touching down to the actual stem happens in some of these other communications, like the Channel 9 newsletter. Again, we see that these T's are heavily weighted with that crossbar and the stem, just like Jack's. In the Oakland County child murder cases, I found H's, which if you take these and look back into the H's of Jack's, we find that these forms were used and were very similar between different letters. So I have this one mapped out here for the square letter H. Where did I place? There should be a yellow. All right, I'm not finding it right this minute. Once again, there's just so much to look at on these slides. But we do see that the TH in the OCCK case was very consistent with what we were seeing in the H's that were in the Zodiac Killer's range. These square H's, I must have mapped this one out on purpose, but I do not see my yellow bar at this point, or my yellow circle. The slant is consistent when we laid down the slant with the stem. In the herb cane, again, we just could cross-reference these all day, including these T's where the stem protrudes out the top of the actual crossbar. These particular T's were extremely consistent with that of the OCCK T's. Herb cane again, so we had some more THs. These ones were probably more consistent with the T's that were separated, such as DC Freeway Phantom. The shape is still there. The Atlanta, Georgia Killer had, in 2 different letters, we had 2 different types of T's. We had the tall, skinny with the short crossbar, and in the other letter, we had the more squarish looking one. We've got about a minute left here. We do see that the slant of the Scorpion T's are consistent. The shape and weight of the crossbar over the stem are consistent. In John Benet Ramsey, again, we had these capital T's that ran into the backside of the H. Again, just a dead on. I don't see that very often where that crossbar runs into the backside of the stem. So, and then we had the more heavily weighted crossbars over the top of the T's in John Benet Ramsey as well. Getting into Vowinovich, we see the same thing once again. The T-bar is right smack dab in the back of the H. That happens to pretty much every single TH connection that we see. We did have a backwards JT again. And of course, we had that lowercase one, which was a combination of the JT. Anthrax had the heavily weighted crossbars over the stem with some tall stems and short crossbars. And then, of course, Tom Voigt's T's were just dead on jacks. If I could match those all day long. And then in the finale letter, again, we saw some of them that were just more heavily weighted with the crossbar to the long stem and short stem. I'm sorry, short crossbar. So that is pretty much all we have for today, you guys. We will be back next week with the lowercase T's, and we'll hopefully sum up this handwriting presentation in the next couple weeks. Take care. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next Friday. Oh,